22 pages. Printed 2 pages per sheet, Dionne. Stapled them together. As you can see, there's some highlighted stuff, some critical material. This is the introductory news conference from Monday morning into the afternoon at Halas Hall in Lake Forest.
Yes.
Ryan Poles, your new Chicago Bears general manager, Matt Eberflus, your new Chicago Bears coach. They tried to share a little bit about themselves, their vision, their unity, all of those things going forward. That's Dionne Miller. I'm Dan Wiederer. We're going to break it down in sort of segmented fashion through this. But before we get going, how you doing after that marathon session up there at 1920 Football Drive?
It was quite the meet and greet, right? And it was more than just the 90 minutes we sat there listening to them talk on stage. It was at about an hour, then with George, then with Justin. It was about a 90-minute, soiree in the auditorium, which we haven't been in so long. Kind of fun. Anyway, so we're in there, and it made it feel like it was the moment it needed to be. It was a big moment. This is a big deal. This is the new faces of the franchise that are going to lead them back to greatness. And then it was meeting with smaller groups and talking one-on-one with people, and it was a long, exhausting time for, I think, both of those guys. But welcome to Chicago. I mean, this is what you're going to get asked. A lot of questions, we're wanting answers. We want to know what's the deal, how you feel about the quarterback that you're inheriting, how you feel about the roster you're inheriting. We want to know that stuff. And now today, I'm going to be honest, Dan, I was slightly underwhelmed. I didn't run out of that press conference thinking, man, I want to run through a wall for these guys. We'll see. Isn't that your favorite line?
That was our line last week, and we promised people we would take that approach and that attitude to this thing. I will say that a couple of quick things. I think, first of all, the introductory press conference has become too much a part of the routine of the Chicago Bears, right? They're revolving that door so frequently that you get in there. And I felt like there was just sort of a lack of energy in that room yesterday. And I don't want to overstate it, but it just kind of felt routine, I guess, and mundane to some extent, because everybody in that room that was covering this has covered these before, and they've heard promises, and they've heard visions, and they've heard buzzwords, and they've heard acronyms and all the things that we got in sort of the templated package Monday. And yet, again, I'm about to start my 10th season covering the team. I've never seen them win a playoff game, right? And so you have to kind of put it through this filter, and that's of no fault of Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, but they also have to understand the dynamic they're walking into, that basically earning the benefit of the doubt back is a major challenge for the Chicago Bears, right? And it's a challenge now that they have to take on, because they don't start out with the benefit of the doubt because of the recent track record of this organization. I thought it'd be fun today if we went through with some categories, right? And kind of reviewed this day through that lens. And so I'm going to start out on the positive lens. You get all these comments, Dionne, below our videos that you're too negative. Everyone thinks you're such a negative Nancy, and I'm a positive person, and they can't understand why you're so down on this team.
I think you're reading the wrong comments. Go ahead.
But let's start here. The most impressive part of Monday. I'll kick it off for you, and I will say that from the 90-minute soiree, as you called it, followed by some of the one-on-ones we did with, in my case, 3-on-1 with my teammates from the Chicago Tribune, I was impressed with Ryan Poles' awareness, right? I think that he's sharp in a way that gives me this feeling like he's got many of Ryan Pace's greatest qualities with a greater big picture awareness of what all this job entails and how much, goes beyond the tunnel vision that you want to have in that role. Start with this. Ryan Poles has hired an assistant general manager, and he has explained right out of the gates why he hired an assistant general manager. He said, listen, in my experience in Kansas City, watching the front office run, the general manager gets pulled in a lot of different directions at a lot of different times. And if you're not prepared for it, everything else can come to a standstill if you don't have somebody that can take the steering wheel when you've got to go run and tend to some of this other stuff that just pops up out of nowhere. Ian Cunningham comes in as the assistant general manager. To me, that's a show of Ryan Poles' intelligence about the position. I'm going to throw this also out there. He also stressed in his one-on-one session with us at the Tribune that stability on the offensive line has to precede any sort of clear-cut evaluation of Justin Fields. Great awareness there of understanding, look, we've got to make sure that this guy is protected up front before we can get a true gauge of who he is as a quarterback and how we can build around him. That's obviously going to be a priority. But anyway, those are two small things that to me left an impression on me on just how alert Ryan Poles is and how prepared he is to step into this role with an understanding of all the things he needs to be alert about.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And also his awareness was tested when his daughter was distracting everybody, and he kept giving him her the dad eye, right?
Like this, out of the side of his eye.
Yeah, but he was so real about that, and he actually like interrupted Eberflus, didn't he, to talk about the offensive line and to mention that fact when they were talking about Justin Fields, and I noticed that too. That really stood out to me, that he's very aware of how you build a team and how you make it all work. And the one thing that stood out to me about him was I loved his emotion. I love that he was real in that moment. I loved seeing him like look around and take it in. He wasn't just reading what was in front of him. He was being so authentic. This is an opportunity of a lifetime for him, and he knew it. And it was kind of endearing to see him get emotional about the guys who've helped him get to this point and prepared him for this. And I think he's ready for it. He understands he can't do it by himself, bringing in Ian Cunningham, who has Super Bowl rings, who's worked with Ozzie Newsome, and he's worked with like big names in the NFL. Yeah, like this is someone who brings a different perspective. But he also said the most important thing about a successful organization is getting everybody on the same page. And I think because he's played, because he understands the importance of the offensive line and the importance of developing the quarterback, and understands that it has that awareness of getting everybody on the same page, it's easy to follow a guy like that. And he's close to their age. I mean, I know we've said that already about Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, but I genuinely think he has a authenticity to him that showed yesterday, and I liked that. I can get behind that with Ryan Poles.
I wrote down the emotion thing here on the side of my note card as well, because it struck me in the moment when he got emotional in his introductory statement about the guys in Kansas City. And I followed up later in the press conference with a question about why. And you could just sense that he appreciated his climb to get here, right? Yeah. And the amount of hours that went into it, the amount of learning experiences that went into it, the amount of brothers that you had to have along with you on the climb to be able to get here. I also thought it was noteworthy that he talked about his experience interviewing with the Carolina Panthers about a year ago for their open general manager position, and how it just sort of heightened his confidence that he had to put together a presentation to go in that interview. And then he gave his presentation and it was received well. And it was kind of like this light bulb moment, like, oh, wait, I am ready for this. Let's go. And so that was pretty cool to hear from him as well.
Dan, the expression on his face when he said that stuck with me. Like I can still see it, because it was like his aha moment, right? Yeah. Like he goes into this interview, he's prepared and prepared and prepared. But then when it was received that way, and he could tell that it was received that way, like he was reading the room and he was like, wait, I can do this. And I just, that to me spoke volumes about even how he impressed the Bears front office in that interview. Like, he came in with a confidence that was even higher than a year ago. And that expression on his face was I don't know. I just liked it. I liked how authentic he was with it.
Similar category. You're first here. Most positive thing you learned on Monday.
Most positive thing.
Again, I know this is going to be hard for you because you like to live in negative Nancy land, but let's go. Let's find something positive in these 22 pages.
Okay. I'm trying to, like, I'm scrolling through. I'm 19 pages. I didn't print it out. I'm running low on toner. I'm doing the best I can here. I think the most positive thing that I heard was that Matt Eberflus is not going to try to be his own defensive coordinator. And he's going to try to be a head coach in the truest sense of the word. He's going to try to be the head coach of everything. And he's not going to try to micromanage something else on the side or keep ownership of that the way that we saw Matt Nagy try to do with the offense. He's going to be a head coach. And that, to me, was a positive, that he's going to hire someone he trusts to take care of that so he can be the head coach and the leader that he's been hired to be. And one thing I could tell from the difference between the two, right? Poles, you could tell this was the first time he was sitting in front of a crowd like this and doing this. But Eberflus sounded very much prepared. Like, I've been waiting my whole life for this head coach thing. And yes, a lot of it was cliche and coach speak, and we can get to all of the cringeworthy moments. But when he said, I'm not going to try to control the defense, I'm going to hire someone to do that, and then I'm going to be the head coach. And I think that's gonna resonate well in the room with the guys too, and just his ability to kind of stand up there and say, I am your head coach. I'm not going to try and micromanage all these other things. This is what I'm going to try to do, and just bring us together. And that, to me, was a positive. Yeah,
for me, one of the positive things I learned was Ryan Poles' aversion to shortcuts, right? He made it clear that he wasn't going to philosophically sort of allow himself to let the eagerness of wanting to succeed overpower the patience and the discipline that's needed to make shrewd long-term decisions for a franchise. It's going to be really interesting to see how he can retain that when the pressure elevates, right? This is, again, a city that's scarred, a city that wants a winner soon. You had people already sort of shoving the Bengals narrative into the conversation yesterday, saying, look, they made a quick turnaround. They're playing in the Super Bowl this year. Isn't that evidence that it's possible for wayward teams to suddenly make this leap and play in the biggest game. And I think to Poles' credit, he made it clear that, listen, we have to make sure that we see this thing through clear eyes, that we have a realistic understanding of where we are, that we're aggressive when we need to be, but also understand that we need to be disciplined in building this roster through the draft, putting together a core of homegrown guys. Like he said that afterwards, a homegrown group that needs to be your core, so that you're not going out every year in free agency trying to find that one splash signing that gets you over the hump. You need those guys to come from within. And so to me, the aversion to shortcuts in principle sounds great. Now, again, you got to show us that through totally 3, 4, 5 years that you don't let that eagerness and ambition overpower that and lead you into some, temptations and some decisions that you don't want to make. All right. The pep rally moment. I'll give you a second to think this through. Mine's an easy one, and it's when Ryan Poles said, "We're going to take the North and never give it back." Right?
Yeah, totally.
One of those things that sounds great in an introductory news conference. 30 minutes after the introductory news conference is over, you're saying, "Okay, that's going to be cool on a T-shirt for people." 40 minutes after the T-shirt,
it's already
right. And then 40 minutes after the introductory news conference, you go, okay, like let's try to win a few games before we vow on dominating the North for the rest of the time.
Right. No, agreed. That was a pep rally moment. I wrote it down. I instantly tweeted it out. Everybody did. It was his signature moment that he had written down that phrase, and he was ready to deliver it that way. That was his moment to say that. I guess that is the pep rally moment. I don't really know that there were others. I mean, it was just so much cliche talk that it's hard to say that really would rally the troops. I mean, Eberflus was even straight up asked, is this stuff that you're trying to preach going to fall on deaf ears? Is that still going to resonate in a locker room? And he feels like it is. He definitely had a lot of those rah-rah things, but I agree with you. The pep rally moment, the rallying cry was, we're going to take the North and we're not going to give it back. Now, yes, in theory, these guys are going to be heroes if they can beat the Packers and win in the playoffs. But that is a tall order when you look at the way this roster looks right now and how much work actually has to be done. And they didn't say that out loud, but they're going to evaluate the work is just beginning, and it's a tall order. But I like the rallying cry. I don't hate it. I mean, it's confidence, right? I mean, say it.
By the way, best pep rally speaker ever, Lance Harbor, quarterback, West Canaan High School, Varsity Blues. Best pep rally speaker ever.
Oh, the best. Okay.
All right. Now we get into the stuff that is more your bread and butter, meat and potatoes. Biggest eye roll moment.
Oh, gosh. I think the biggest eye roll moment. Okay, I have to look because there were several. I think when Eberflus said Chicago tough. And I think that was when I was like, oh, okay, what does that mean again? Like, why are we throwing out these cliches and superlatives of how they expect their teams to be? Like, why would you? I don't know. It felt rehearsed. It felt phony. It didn't feel. And then in repeating his hits thing and kind of.
We promised that last week on the show. We told people, we gave them a sneak preview of the hits thing.
We did, and it wasn't unique to the situation, right? Like it was, oh, we're going to be Chicago tough. No one talks like that. No one read the room. And I think in that moment, it was like, okay, yeah, we've heard that from the last 5 guys who've been replaced after 2 to 3 years. So come up with something else, because that to me was kind of cringeworthy.
Well, and the reason it's significant is because there are going to be 90 men at some point sitting in that auditorium and in another meeting room at Halas Hall and listening to you as players, trying to feel your energy. And if it leads them to roll their eyes early, it's not going to be positive. Because again, as we've talked about, the Bears are going to lose some games in 2022, most likely more than they win. And so they're going to have to be able to have a foundation that's more than sort of the rah-rah coach speak and this other stuff that basically buoys them when things get a little bit rough. And so you have to be able to understand what resonates with your group of players, right? And that's going to be a challenge for Matt Eberflus. For me, it was when he warned the players to get your track shoes on, right? Because it was like, oh boy, okay, you know, that may not necessarily hit the bullseye the way you want to hit the bullseye with players that are like, oh really? Right out of the gate, you're telling us you're going to run. I get what Matt Eberflus is trying to do. He's trying to establish a culture here. And he said it multiple times. This is going to be a maximum effort culture. We are going to measure effort every practice, every rep of every practice. I like that part of things, making sure that there's daily accountability and even more micro than daily accountability. Every rep of every practice, like just measure it. Tell everyone in the room who's practicing the hardest, who's not, and create that standard and that culture. I just don't know if demanding and ordering running and sprinting right out of the gates is the thing that's going to get guys to rush back to Halas Hall for the spring program and say, let's go, coach. All I want to do is run gassers and puke at Halas Hall.
No, right, exactly. It was a little too, it was, especially because you haven't even met these guys. He understands. He told me in our one-on-one, he's like, I understand the importance of that first impression. That was your first impression, is that you're going to make them run? Like, that was not thought out well. And that's fine. I'm all about, and I get it. He has gotten buy-in from all of the guys he's coached defensively. He's gotten that buy-in. That's all I've heard about his reputation, is the standard is the standard. And he sets it and they follow it, and it works. And I've seen that defensively. I just don't know if that's going to bring, if running gassers in August is going to bring everybody together and be like, yep, this is our coach. He reminded me, I hate even saying this out loud, but he reminded me of a combination between Tressman and Nagy, right? It was kind of like Tressman was kind of quirky and weird. When he was talking about crossing the aisles and we're going to bring everybody together, I was like, oh my gosh, don't mix up the locker room. Like, don't do that again. And then with Nagy, like that, like wanting to say what everybody wanted to hear kind of thing. And I mean, again, it's a wait and see thing, but those were a couple of times where I was like, oh gosh. And then when he came out with the whys, oh wow. I mean, Dan, I was like, oh my gosh, no, don't say it. Don't say it.
Don't say it.
Don't say it. Don't say it. We heard collaborate one time. And then he was like, well, we got to explain the whys. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, we can't hear that. That's nothing. That means nothing to us.
The whys are dead in Chicago, Matt.
They are dead. They are dead.
I think he also said in a one-on-one with ChicagoBears.com that they're in the man building business, right? And that's very Tressman-esque. And you say, okay, let's steer through that as quick as possible. All right, I'm going to give you a lighter one. I can go first if you want me to. But funniest moment from Monday.
Funniest moment.
Yeah.
The funniest moment. I think when George talked about picking him up at the airport, I think that was the funniest moment to me, because it was so, George was like, well, of course I drove to the airport and picked him up and parked in. I mean, it was just kind of hokey, and that's who George is. But that to me was funny, I guess. Also, I don't know that anything was inherently funny. Or the way he behaved when someone called him out about Ryan and Matt again, which I know is kind of overplayed, but at the same time, it's so awkward and weird, and no one seemed to acknowledge it. Like, that's just bizarre.
Well, back to your first topic, George did tell us he parked on the White Sox level, and he said $3 to the city, which is, typical George. I like George's wit. Trust me, for all that we criticize George about his wit, it hits a chord with me, and I enjoy it. I wrote down the Mike Berman question. He said, I think it was something along the lines of, hey, George, Ryan and Matt again, really?
Yeah.
Are you any concerns? And George just sat there, stone-faced, deadpan, and then went, oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean,
look, again, George is, in my opinion, he's delightfully quirky. He needs to be much better as the overseer of a charter franchise in the NFL that's trying to win at a high level in this league, and he needs to go there. But there is something about his personality that resonates with people. Ryan Poles told us in the press conference, after the press conference, that George picking him at the airport made an impression on him, right? It made him feel like George is hungry to get this done. It was different than any of the other general manager interviews he had done this year or last year. And he just said, look, it showed me he cared, right? And that was George's goal, right? Now, look, driving back to Lake Forest in the Honda Accord of the owner of the franchise and then getting a late night tour of the facility is quirky, and it's unique and it's rare and it's odd, but that's George, right? And so for all his flaws, it made an impression on the new general manager in a positive fashion, and we'll see where it leads from here. Maybe 3 years from now, Ryan Poles learns a little bit more about the McCaskey family and has a different impression of all of it, right? Because it is a quirky group. But again, like I'll tell you a story. We were actually in Providence for Bears Patriots crossover practices. This has got to be Payson Fox's first year or second year, maybe 2016, I think it was. And my brother lives in Boston. He drives to Providence with his daughter, and we go walk around the Brown campus for half an hour. We run across George and his wife just doing what George does, walks around, right? And George stops, says hello, has like a 15-minute conversation with us on a street corner, right? And we walk away, and my brother goes, just to be clear, that was the owner of the Chicago Bears, right? I said, yeah, you know what I mean? And that's George, right? It's like you have to remind yourself, wait a second, this guy is the owner of this franchise, but there's that kindness and that wit and that personable nature that does him favors in some circumstances. Perhaps in this circumstance, it did him some favors.
Well, I will say the line from Poles that stuck with me throughout the whole day was that he could tell that George is an owner of a team that is hungry to get it right. And I as much as we criticize George and as much as we say, well, him and Ted need to, do X, Y, and Z, and we want to fix what they seem to be getting wrong over and over again, that can resonate with fans too. That what he saw was a franchise that is so eager to get it right and to start winning again. And so it's not just about the money. We've asked that before. Like, do they care if they win? They do. They want to. And that stuck with me yesterday. And you're right. George is so quirky. I mean, even the video of him walking through the airport, even that was quirky. Like, it was just like his hands were down and he was walking. I mean, it's just.
He had a Letterman jacket on and a Bears mask. And, and then he's carrying Ryan Poles' bags and he parked in the White Sox level and all those things, right?
All the things.
It's all part of the package. All right. Yes. 2 more categories for you.
Okay.
Biggest surprise from Monday.
The biggest surprise
for me, it was.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I'll give you a minute to think this through. For me, it was Justin Fields popping up on the dais. We're not used to having the starting quarterback pop up on the dais after these introductory news conferences. Mitch Trubisky wasn't there when Matt Nagy was announced. Jay Cutler wasn't there when John Fox was announced. It's just not something the Bears have often done. It also followed that 90-minute session, or was at the tail end of the 90-minute session, where we didn't hear a lot shared about what Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles' vision is for Justin Fields. And that was kind of surprising. Matt Eberflus was asked directly by Mark Grody of The Score, do you see Justin as your franchise quarterback? And it was a very quick and dodgy answer about, well, right now we're looking at all our players the same way. And we want to look at their film and see what they do well and create a plan. And there wasn't like this emphatic, confident, absolutely, Justin is the guy we're going to win championships with. And it kind of made you sit back in your chair a minute and go, well, wait a second, like, to take this job, you probably should have supreme belief in the quarterback that the Bears traded up last year to get. Does Matt Eberflus have that? I don't know, right? We've got to learn that more in the months ahead. And it was just a little bit strange to me to hear him immediately just kind of say, oh, we're treating all the players the same. Well, you can't do that for very long because your starting quarterback is the guy that's going to propel this. We just got done talking about the Bengals playing in the Super Bowl. The Bengals aren't playing in the Super Bowl unless Joe Burrow took that springboard leap and became a star, right? And so by the time you get to late May and you're starting the full team mini camp in June, you better be looking at Justin Fields through a different lens than you're looking through the other 89 players that are at that practice session.
Okay, I will go with you that the pleasant surprise was that we heard from Justin Fields. And I will say, his body language, everything was different and more uplifted, energized, if you will, than the last time that we saw him during the season. That stood out to me for sure. But I think the biggest surprise to me was the vagueness with which they responded to every question about Fields. That surprised me that they didn't want to commit to him at all. Now, does that mean that they're being cautious about that commitment, that the Bears maybe as an organization are questioning what he can do or if they got the right guy? I don't know. But it was interesting that neither one of them wanted to say, yes, this is the guy. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure he maximizes the potential we already see in him. They didn't say that. And that's stunning to me, especially because he was there. Especially because he was there. Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure where he was watching from, but certainly he was listening. And I asked Eberflus later, hey, can you just give us your thumbnail scouting report on who Justin is as a quarterback? And it was really brief. And he said, athletic, super leader. We're going to get to know him more, all that kind of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So they've got to figure out a plan. And the plan starts with Luke Getsy, the new offensive coordinator, coming in and uniting with him. Luke Getsy gets rave reviews around the league for a guy who can connect with players, no matter what position they play. And so now it's his job to bring Justin to those new heights. We talked about it last week. It's got to be an energizing force.
I think it will be. I think it will be. And I really do. I'm excited. I hope we get to meet Luke Getsy. I hope we get to know his personality a little bit and see and understand that connection he's going to have with Justin, because it is so vital. It's so vital. They're going to be like in lockstep with each other. This has to be where he makes his biggest jump, is from year 1 to year 2. And this is the guy who's going to help him. I hope we get to meet him. But from what his reputation and what what Eberflus said about him is, he's the same way. He's one of those guys that connects through relationship, but then he helps produce those results. And and as Justin said, he's been around a pretty good offense. He's not going to be mad about taking a coach from Green Bay. So let's see what he can do.
All right. Last but not least, your lingering question when you got in your car and pulled out the lot there at Halas Hall yesterday.
Lingering question. Well, I think one of them was about, like, what do they really feel about Justin Fields? But the other thing that I was like, why are they so secretive about their contracts? And why were they so awkward about having the same agent? And it was an awkward moment. It was one of those where it was like, so did that do anything? I mean, they looked at each other like, how did everybody know we had the same agent? Like it was just a weird. And so I left and I was like, why was that? That was mysterious to me. That didn't sit well with me. Why was that so uncomfortable for them? And the holding back on how long their contracts are. Like, why is it so secret? Those were the two things that stood out to me. I mean, there were other questions too, but I think those lingered with me.
The contract length is obviously an organizational pivot. They used to tell us the length of the contracts all the time, and they used to have it on their website. They would tell you how long each guy's contract was. I don't know what that was about. I wrote down what you just said was, along with this, just how much of an arranged marriage was this? I'm still trying to get to the bottom of how much Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles knew each other before last week, right? You ask them both and they say, well, through league context, we've known each other for a long time. And Ryan Poles told you that Matt has been on my radar for a long time. If I got a job like this, he was going to be one of my favorites as a coach. He said yesterday, look, I walked into my one-on-one interview at Halas Hall with Matt Eberflus, and I knew the minute that he walked into the room that he was my guy. And you said, well, how do you know that? And what's the extent of your relationship that gives you that deep conviction that this is worth, uniting on and trying to pursue a vision on? The agent part of it is certainly noteworthy. Their agent is Trace Armstrong, who many a month and a half ago were saying would be a perfect candidate to be the type of president of football operations that the Bears organization needs to have that sophisticated football lens at the top of the front office to be able to run things. Well, guess what? Trace Armstrong doesn't need to take that title to sort of run the Bears. He has now put the head coach in place, the general manager in place, the offensive coordinator in place, and certainly there are going to be more on this coaching staff that are part of the Trace Armstrong tree. And so it does raise questions on how much of his fingerprints are on this entire operation going forward, right?
He's oddly getting paid for it, for his role with the Bears. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan and Matt can answer this in the months to come, and we can learn a lot more about how they know each other, what they like about each other, all those things. But it did leave you kind of at the end of that because, Ryan Poles was asked, would you have been open to conducting a more extensive search if you would have been allowed to? I think it was Mark Potash who asked the question. He said, I was allowed to, and I found this guy.
Yeah.
Right. And so he felt very confident in his decision, but that is something process wise that we're going to have to keep an eye on in the years ahead to say, if this works or if it doesn't work, where were the potential missteps that could have been improved in this process? That's one of them. Because again, we talked last week, Ryan Poles hired his head coach less than 48 hours after being hired as the general manager himself. He only conducted 2 days or a day and a half of interviews, right? One night, the night he got hired, he interviewed Jim Caldwell. The next day he did Matt Eberflus and Dan Quinn. And then he slept and then told Matt Eberflus the next day, you're my guy. So these questions are there and they'll linger for a while.
Yeah, they will. And you're right. We discussed this at Halas Hall yesterday. It was part of this. It was very confusing because I couldn't figure out, Poles was very adamant about this. He was already on my short list. He was adamant about that. But at the same time, George then came in and confused the situation by saying, well, we told him he could interview these 3 guys. But was that it? There was a lot of missing information in there. So yeah, their connection through Trace Armstrong, how Eberflus ended up on the short list. What is the connection outside of their agent? How would he even had him on his radar outside of his agent? I don't know that. Right. So you're right that there's misinformation that hopefully will come together. But I will tell you this, Dan, no matter what questions we had yesterday, if these 2 guys win, it all goes away. Goes away. If this works, all of that doubt goes away. And then you have some sort of faith restored. But we are still on February 1st, we are still in that mold of, okay, prove it.
Has to be. You have to be in that mode. If you're not in that mode, you're a blind loyalist and you deserve anything that comes to you if the Bears crash and burn again, right? They've earned the skepticism. They've earned the scrutiny. I wrote it down at the bottom of my card. How do you turn hopes into habits? That was Matt Eberflus's line yesterday. That's what the Bears need to do. They've been trying for 3 decades to turn hopes into habits, trying to turn a mediocre franchise into one that can sustain success. Ryan Poles comes from an organization that makes the playoffs every year, goes to the conference championship every year in recent vintage, right? So he understands what it's like to sustain success. He's got to try to turn his hopes into habits. Matt Eberflus has got to try to turn his hopes into habits. And hopefully before long, we've got enough content here so that you don't have to be so down on this franchise and so negative all the time. And the people in the comments can be like, boy, Dionne is so bright and cheery today. She finally turned a corner.
I need to. There's like definitely darkness in my heart lately. I am really like short, but I am always positive. Always positive. Who would have thought that we'd say if the Bears could just be like the Bengals?
Right?
That's really what's happened in the
Right.
last 3 weeks. How crazy is that?
No question about it. We are less than 4 weeks now from the start of the scouting combine in Indianapolis. And so you better get your breath now because it's going to pick up in a fast and a hurry. The combine is followed by free agency, which is followed by the draft, which is followed by OTAs and minicamp. There's not a time to take a breath if you don't take it now. So you better get yourself rested.
I think that is actually the advice for you, my friend. Take an exhale. The coach and the GM have been hired. Assistants will pop in here and there, but it'll all be there in like a couple weeks. We can all take a breath.
Listen, for you folks out there, you need to like, you need to subscribe, you need to share. We need to build this thing into an empire, most of all, so Dionne can afford some toner for her printer so she can print out the transcripts of these press conferences.
Yes. I don't, and maybe better lights, maybe merch.
A studio, merch. We're going to do it all. It's going to go big. 2022, we're turning hopes into habits. We're doing it.
We're going to be Chicago tough.